Well, hello. It's kind of late, but here I am because I just finished couple of sessions with helping Dana and Sophie with their math, and came to a couple of, I think, fairly significant understandings, which I wanted to capture and hopefully share with them and maybe share with some other people. And I thought, well, maybe I should wait till tomorrow. It's kind of late. And then um, the line from the Rubaiyat by Omar Khayyam came to mind. Tomorrow? Why, tomorrow I may be myself with yesterday's 7,000 years. So let's do what we may do tonight, and that is to put forward the idea that these mathematical problems, I guess, that we are addressing with Sophie and Dana can be compared to the difference between learning a language and becoming fluent in a language. They're two very different things, as many people have learned when they went to school and maybe got A's in their so-called foreign language and went to the country and tried to speak it, and nobody understood them, and they did not understand anyone else. So that's sort of the fundamental difference between learning and fluency. And a great writer, I think, a very foresightful fellow in the field of language acquisition, is a guy named Stephen Krashen, and he made the distinction between language learning and language acquisition. And language acquisition is simply when you become fluent enough to understand what other people are saying, read what other people are writing, and speak and be understood, and maybe perhaps even write and be understood. So that's the difference between knowing a language and acquiring, or learning the language and acquiring the language, or knowing the language and being fluent in the language. And Stephen Krashen talks primarily about the language filter coming into, or pardon me, the affective filter coming into play. And I think I have been encountering that, especially with Dana, somewhat with Sophie, but mainly with Dana, is that in a language acquisition, the goal, actually the way you acquire the language, is to have, as Stephen Krashen says, massive amounts of comprehensible input. So three really important terms there: input, comprehensible input, okay, and massive amounts. And to receive in your brain, in your neural networks that you have going on inside your head that allow you to eventually acquire language, not just learn it, not just learn rules, but actually acquire the language, be able to use it, be able to understand it, be able to be understood. You have to acquire that language. And if you don't have massive amounts of input, then your brain doesn't have much to work on, and it's not going to acquire the language. And the thing that can get in the way of receiving massive amounts of input is your affective filter. And fundamentally, if you get stressed, like Dana does a lot when presented with math, then nothing goes in. And so acquisition does not acquire. And in fact, even learning doesn't acquire much. Doesn't happen much, rather. So I think that the big thing is that somehow or another in school, math has come to be treated as something that you learn, and very few students, if any, well, a few, yeah, some do, but yeah, some students actually acquire math. They learn to think in math, and even communicate in math, right? And relate to the universe through math. For others, most others, in fact, it's a matter of learning rules. And one of the problems with the way that happens in school is that the input is generally not comprehensible. At least not for an eighth grader. If you give an eighth grader something that says 3x minus 5 equals minus 7x plus 4, or whatever numbers you want to say. What meaning does that really have? Even to me, you know? Well, I see it as a problem. I say, oh, yeah, that's kind of interesting. That can be kind of fun to solve that maybe. But it has, in real life, no meaning until it's related to something. And so we go to school, or we send the kids to school, we put this stuff that has no intrinsic meaning, like these equations out of the blue or out of the ether or wherever they're coming from, on a sheet of paper that, wow. You talk about the affective filter going up and nothing getting in. And even if something getting in, how can you make it comprehensible? So I think that if what I'm going to be trying to do with Dana and Sophie, in spite of what may be presented to them at school, is help them learn that just like language is a system of symbols for communication, so is mathematics. Mathematics is a beautiful system, and what are the components of mathematics? They learn to know there's operators, there's and there's numbers, right? There's values and operators, and I guess you could consider probably value signs like plus or minus as operators, perhaps. But in any event, that they learn to understand that, hey, if you just use math a lot, if you get lots of comprehensible input, you will not just learn it, you will acquire it, and you will learn to relate to the universe through this marvelous system of communication we have, which is called mathematics. So, by the same way that Dana and Sophie have both learned to communicate with the world and relate to the world through this system of communication we have called language, and specifically in their case right now, the English language, and the whole complex relationship of the primitives of those systems, which are letters primarily on the written page, and relate those somehow to phonemes, which we hear and produce, and turn that all into a way that we can talk to some other kid or the teacher or friends or whatever in the world. So anyhow, I think I've captured most of the stuff that I'm thinking about now. Implementing it with the girls will be another thing, but I believe that one of the keys to making input comprehensible, or rather, I should say, one of the keys to reducing and eliminating the affective filter, which means nothing gets in because you're just, it scares the hell out of you, and you freeze up like the deer in the headlights. Hit one time. But anyhow, well, actually the deer ran into my car. It was not freezing, it was running. But anyhow, so people, we don't freeze up like the deer in the headlights, the proverbial deer in the headlights, but we let it into our minds and we begin to process it. And I think one way of doing that with mathematics, probably the best way of doing it, is with some kind of gaming. And the gaming should involve meaningful stuff like finances, heavenly days. One of the most successful ways of relating to the world, in addition to language, is the language of numbers for investing and keeping a budget, and and becoming rich or becoming poor. And I think that working the rich dad, poor dad game of cash flow, we're going to try that out. That should be some fun. And there are other ways of relating to the world with numbers, and I think we will get into some of those, like, I guess it still does have to do with accounting. I'm hoping to introduce the girls to the phenomenal changes that came about in the world because of Luca Pacioli and his system of using mathematics to allow Ferdinand and Isabella, for example, to invest in a guy named Christopher Columbus, and he went sailing off with 3 ships, the Nina, Pinta, and Santa Maria, as I recall, and discovered not the Far East, not not India, although he didn't know that, but the country the continent that I live on right now, and that probably most people listening to this live on right now. But that was all thanks to numbers becoming comprehensible and useful and relating to reality, like what you do with your money and what you invested in to get a return, for heaven's sakes. So anyhow, that's what I'm thinking about, and that's what I hope to do with the girls. And I hope this is useful to teachers, administrators, parents, anybody else that happens to get a chance to listen to it. Mainly my 2 daughters, I hope, and perhaps my 2 older sons, just for giggles. Although they have learned mathematics pretty well, actually. One of them successful on Wall Street, the other one, engineering economics and operations research from Stanford, and has put that to good use. And wow, doesn't it all come down to numbers? Or largely come down to numbers? Well, okay. We have dealt with some systems here, and I hope to come back on another day and talk a little bit, break this down into what we can call primitives, because also that allows us to identify the fundamental elements of any system that allows us to communicate either with ourselves or with the rest of the world. And we've talked about language, we've talked about math. It'll be fun to talk about primitives and the way that primitives in art allow us to communicate both our own feeling of just, self-expression, express ourselves, and sometimes express something to other people, and then maybe sell a painting for a lot of money, which then with mathematics, you'll know what to do with your money. Invest it somewhere else. Okay, have a good evening. Hope to talk to you later. And I usually wear my hat and my mask to make this whole experience more palatable or less unpalatable for people who are watching. But I left my cowboy mask at home and my cowboy hat at home. So this is the Lone Stranger signing off with a mighty hi-ho silver and away. Ta-da-ta-da-ta-da-ta-da, ta-da-ta-da-ta-da.